Doesn't work unless I start at least one show muted, right, Ryan? Good morning, everyone. Aloha. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Yenji Denise, joined by Ryan Kalei-Suji. This, of course, is Spotlight Hawaii. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Ryan, we've got a guest that we used to talk to when we first started this program all the time, but it's been a while, so we have a lot of catching up to do.
That's right. We're kind of calling this the Where Are They Now Spotlight Hawaii series, I guess. We are joined by former Honolulu Mayor Kirk Caldwell, who is joining us now to catch up on some of the things that he's been up to and getting his thoughts on the city's response to COVID-19. Good morning. Great to see you.
Good morning, Yunji, and good morning, Ryan. As we were talking, I do miss not talking story with you like I did as mayor, and I have to say I miss being mayor. It was a great job in a most difficult of times. But it's good to be before you today to talk about what's happened since I left as mayor. And I look forward to having a kind of a talk story with you.
Yeah, we are as well. Before we get to any of that, I wanted to get more just of a general update of what you've been up to since you left office and how have you been occupying your time?
Yeah. So my term came to an end at noon on January 2nd. And it was just me and my executive assistant on the last day. And, at noon, we turned off the lights and closed the door and I went home. And I have to say, it was a very emotional experience for me, going a million miles an hour to 0 miles an hour. I did a lot of sleeping for a while. And then I started spending a lot of time with my wife, with my siblings. I'm the oldest of 5 kids. I have a brother and sister on the Big Island. So I went there a number of times. My sister became paralyzed in her 50s from the waist down, and she wanted to do a couple of projects at her new home. So I helped her with a garden with hapu and anthuriums and a couple other things, helped my brother with things around his house. And then I reconnected with friends too. I have friends a lot on the Big Island, but Maui and Kauai, and of course here, and started surfing with them more, started hiking with them more. And just, doing things with them. And then the last thing is, I've really, now that I have the time, I've been spending a lot of time just talking story with the folks around the state of Hawaii. When I go to the neighbor islands, I have the time. So if I'm sitting at a restaurant and people want to come up and talk story, I can actually sit down and talk about, their lives and their fears, their concerns, their hopes, their joys. Going to, whether it's, going to Garden Exchange in Hilo and talking story with some people who remember my father, or, being on Kauai and going to, one of the great cafes and just spending time in line as you wait to be seated are things I've been doing. And I want to do more of that. I mean, I really just enjoy hearing the stories of the people of Hawaii, their hopes and dreams and aspirations. And finally, tons of yard work. I planted 13 trees. I've help re-landscape things. I love it. That is one of my passions because no one tells me what to do. I just do it. And I feel the sense of accomplishment. And I'm going to continue to do that too.
The last time we spoke with you, we asked you about those future plans. You did mention, holo holo all over all the islands and some camping trips that were in store. Yeah. You also said that you were going to be working on some books. So how's the writing going?
It's going well. It's taking a little longer than I thought. This is the first time I've attempted to write a book. And so we're doing the research right now. And the book is basically stories about how we came together as a community during this pandemic. The first time in over 100 years that we were struck by a pandemic. And what we did as a community, and the thing that's reaffirming as we talk to people, as we compile these stories, is how everyone basically put aside their own self-interest for the greater interest of community. And I think that is a story that's more unique to Hawaii than other places around our country. Most people made tremendous sacrifices, personal, financial, to help each other. And when you hear these stories, at times, I would get choked up. I think about the mass food distributions that were put together by the Community Foundation and by the Food Bank and by Bank of Hawaii and the city and county and others, the volunteers who came forward, but then the stories of those who came into lines to accept food who had never, ever in their life been unemployed. And now they had no job, both their significant other and themselves, and they needed to eat. And they found the courage to come into a line but also watching the people who are distributing the food and understanding that courage that they had to find and the love and kindness that was exhibited on both sides um, are just some of the incredible stories we'll be sharing in this book. And I think we can all be very proud of. And finally, I hope it's a history a little bit of what occurred, because as mayor, when the pandemic hit, there was no book to go to. There was no story to read on any of this. And I think it's important to record the history a little bit for the future, and also just to recognize the actions of those during the crisis. And so it's moving along, but not as quickly. I'm hoping to finish all the research in the next month. And then the really hard part comes into play, putting it all down into words and then publishing the book.
I wanted to get your thoughts as we look back and as you reflect back on that time, as you mentioned, through this process of writing this book, but also what you took away from some of the lessons that you learned and leading during this time of the pandemic. If there was one thing that you thought that maybe you could have done a little differently, or something that you thought maybe was also a success, what would you say those two things would be?
Stepping back, and I go over this whenever I'm interviewing folks for the book, what else could I have done better? And a couple of things is one, I think making strong, decisive action is extremely important. And I think during my time as mayor, from my first year to my 8th year, I did learn that lesson to be willing to make stronger decisions earlier. And I think when the pandemic came to our shores, I'm going to say starting in February, early March, we started to take action pretty quickly, shutting down restaurants early on before anyone else, only to take out, and then implementing the first stay-at-home and work-at-home order. These were difficult decisions. There was no one you could turn to for advice. Is it the right thing to do? It's what we thought we should do based on the information we were being provided at the time. And I have no real regrets for doing it. Sometimes I ask myself, should we have done it sooner? In a pandemic, overreaction is probably the best reaction, not underreacting, because it's about saving lives and stemming the spread of this virus that was spreading quickly throughout our community. So maybe taking some action earlier on would have been better. The other thing is fighting harder, Ryan, fighting a lot harder for the 3 pillars that we did fight for as we went further down the road. And that is testing, contact tracing, and isolation. We believed in those things in March. We pushed, but when we didn't get the results we wanted, because these are all things that are not within the silo of the city, and we tried to do it ourselves and we got pushback, we kind of stepped back for a while. And one of the takeaways is that if you think this is what needs to be done, if I thought this needed to be done, we should have done it earlier, because I think if we had had more aggressive testing at a city level, not listening and saying there was enough capacity, if we had an army of tracers not finding out that there really wasn't an army, and we hired our own at the end of the day, and we had those isolation hotels earlier, I think we could have stemmed the spread and stayed open. Like some of the great cities around the world who remained open because they were more aggressive in the types of things were done. Now, having said that, one thing that I come away with, and I think the governor and my fellow mayors at the time, and the current mayors, Mayor Blangiardi and Mayor Roth, are doing a really good job in terms of trying to find that balance between protecting the public's health and safety while allowing business to open up. And that is always going to be the balance. And, no matter what is done, there's going to be people who think you should go slower, be more cautious. And there are going to be people who are going to say, you need to go faster. Mm-hmm. The thing you need to do, though, is to make sure you make decisive decisions and you stay the course until there are new facts that present themselves that perhaps you need to adjust.
Well, to that point, there's a debate that's happening right now. We see it between the lieutenant governor and the governor when it comes to allowing certain things and benchmarks to getting past our COVID-19 restrictions. There's a question right here from Chase that sort of speaks to this, which is, what's your opinion on the indoor mask mandate? As you noted during your time in office, you did take a more conservative approach, to try to to try to restrict the virus, but then there were businesses who said we need to stay open. So where do you fall on that spectrum? Are you more, in line with the governor to say that we need to get to that true 70% vaccination, or do you side more with other folks who say that we need to reopen because we're the last state in the country right now that has this indoor mask mandate?
Yeah. So, Yunji, one, debate is healthy. I think having a debate on this and you covering it is healthy for all of us in the state of Hawaii. And we had tons of debates with the governor and the mayors during the year of the pandemic that I was there. And a lot of these debates were held in closed rooms with a lot of people. Once a decision was made, we all walked out and we supported the decision, even though sometimes we may not have supported it internally. Having said that, I think putting health and safety first is always important. And I think the governor, along with the mayors, are doing that right now in terms of protecting all of us. Mask wearing, I think, is a good way to protect yourself from the spread of the virus, and particularly now with the Delta variant, which is becoming more widespread in the state of Hawaii and will probably become the predominant variant in short order. Highly contagious, and the vaccines are not as effective. They're pretty darn effective, maybe 1 or 2% less so. That wearing a mask is just another level of protection. And as you know, there have been folks who have been vaccinated who still got the virus, including the Delta variant. And I think the Star-Advertiser reported on 3 family members who all passed away from, even though they're vaccinated. So I think caution is the better way to go. I do support the decision by the governor and the mayors to stay the course for now. I think we should focus instead on getting everyone vaccinated. Ryan was mentioning in LA County, the percentage of those vaccinated is much higher than in Hawaii. And I think instead of focusing on, let's get rid of a mask mandate or other things or moving the goalpost, let's instead double down, work harder to get more folks vaccinated to protect themselves, but also to protect us who have been vaccinated. And probably most importantly for me is to make sure that people don't get sick, because there could be a mutation that becomes immune to the vaccines we have. And then we go back to the beginning. We don't want to do that. So I think it's incumbent on all of us, for the sake of ourselves, but even for the greater community, to step up and be vaccinated.
Another hot topic right now, of course, is the resurgence of the tourism industry in Hawaii. We're seeing a bunch of tourists that are returning to the islands, and we see this debate happening between the legislative body as well as the administration. There was discussion about how the GET tax and the allocation to counties should be managed. Of course, we all know that the legislature overrode Governor David Ige's veto on that matter. I wanted to get your thoughts on where we're at with tourism, but also more specifically, the county's new ability to charge this 3% and what that would have meant for you. And do you think the county is in a position to be able to collect these taxes on their own?
Yeah. So number one, all of us play to our strengths, whether as individuals or as organizations or places. And there's no doubt that Hawaii's, one of its great strengths is tourism. And that's because of the aloha that we have in our community and the incredible beauty of our Aina and our place here in the middle of the Pacific. And so that is a strength, and tourism has always been a strong driver here since the turn of the last century. Now, having said that, that strength comes a lot from the community. And if we don't take care of the community that makes it special, then we're not that special place. And I think we need to refocus on how we're handling tourism, and we should have done it by now in a lot of ways. And here's the point. Almost every day, the Star-Advertiser, or every other day, has stories about the number of tourists coming and different stories, and the drumbeat is more visitors, more visitors. And if you think back prior to the pandemic, we had very strong years of visitor arrivals, but the amount of money being spent was less than the previous year. So there is greater impact on our resources and on the people of our community, but not with the money being left here. And I think instead of focusing on numbers, we should be focusing on dollars spent. Having people come here who spend more money and maybe have less people actually here in the state. The second thing is how much money stays here. So we know that the vast majority of the hotels owned in Hawaii are owned by hedge funds and REITs and other companies that are not headquartered here. The money that's made here should stay here. And if we're going to be seeing room rates rising, which are going up now, I think that should somehow be tied to the wages of those who work in our visitor industry. So many of the people who work in our industry can't afford to really live here and have 2-3 jobs, who commute from the Eva Plain every day and work in a hotel and then maybe work in a care home and then maybe do janitorial service on the side just to live in a home out in Eva. And I do think their wages need to be increased so their families can continue to live here in the future. And I think the big players in our visitor industry need to be on the side of Hawaii and work with us to make sure that not only wages are good, but those who supply the visitor industry, suppliers of food and other services, they are paid a fair wage so that they can continue to thrive, that our entire business community centered around the visitor industry succeeds along with our visitors. Now, getting to your more specific question, I do think that we need to manage our resources better. And as mayor, then in my term during the pandemic, pushed hard to open up Hanauma Bay. We decided, we're questioning, maybe we leave it closed. It's healthier in some ways for the environment, but we wanted to start this experiment of reopening a resource in a limited way where only a certain number could come in, a little over 700 a day, in tranches of about 100 at a time. And to manage that, and we were working on setting up a reservation system. And the reason for that was I wanted to start with a pilot as to how do you manage these scarce, fragile resources where visitors can come and locals can come in a way that doesn't impact that resource. And we need to do more of that. There are other examples, the reservation system for the sunrise at Haleakala, what Mayor Kawakami is doing in Kauai going out to Haena. These are all examples. But I do think the Tourism Authority has a major role to play in this. And I think John DeFries is on the right path to set up a way to manage these resources, and they need the funding to do that. And I do support providing the Tourism Authority more funding than what they received. Now that's number one. Number two, we need to keep visitors in the areas where they should be, which is in the resort zoned areas, not in our neighborhoods with vacation rentals in large numbers. And that's why, as mayor, we worked hard, passed Bill 89 that made it easier to crack down on people, not by finding them in the home, but just by advertising. And then more recently, right before I left, negotiating with the hosting platforms that provide about 90% of all the vacation rentals on Oahu, making them provide the TMK for these rentals, providing the tourism accommodation tax number so that they we would know whether they're legal or illegal, and they've agreed that if they're illegal, they would take them off their hosting platforms. More of that needs to be done than has been done now, but that's the other thing that we need to do. And then finally, Ryan, to your thing, I do support giving the counties the authority to raise the transit accommodation tax. I think that is a way to manage the number of visitors who come to the various islands. And I think the mayors and the county councils at each island know best what that number should be. Kauai, fragile environment. They're very concerned about the impact of visitors. And so if you raise the TAT, it's going to regulate the number of those coming, and it's going to result in those coming paying a little bit more, but really wanting to come because they want to appreciate the uniqueness of the different islands. And then the counties get that money and they can devote it to protecting those very resources that people are coming to see. And so I do support the counties doing it. I think it's going to be a challenge for the counties to set up a collection system. I'm hopeful that they'll be able to work with the state of Hawaii in doing so. They have a system set in place. And I think we're all in this together. We're all partners, the state and the counties. And I have a lot of hope that you'll see the state working with the counties to collect that tax. Now, then the last thing is, I'm hoping that the mayors and the county councils have the political courage to actually vote to increase the tourism accommodation tax by 3% to begin the process of managing the number of visitors that come here, and then using that money to help improve the scarce resources of our community. Sorry for the length of that question, but I'm passionate about this. We all are.
Well, it's a complicated issue.
And thank you for clarifying. I know I said GT, but I meant the TAT, but you understood. Thank you so much for clarifying that.
It is a complicated issue for sure. And, when we talk about managing tourists, you talk about trying to get a higher dollar spend and perhaps instituting, what they've done on Kauai at Haena or, on Maui at Haleakala, more of a permit system to watch the sunrise, which a lot of people, when that first came out, were really kind of shocked by that. But what are your thoughts on increasing sort of user fees overall throughout the state? Not for Kama'aina, but for the visitors. And is that a practical way to do it? Would it be, toll roads if it was on the state level, or would it be, permits or more parking fees, or how would you actually see that, on a practical level? How could we actually do that? Because we all agree that we want to protect resources, but it's not really clear how that could happen.
Yeah, I do support the concept of user fees for visitors to gain access to various attractions. Now, again, using Hanauma Bay, as you know, the council, and I think they were wise in doing this. This happened after I left, raised the entry fee even higher than it was. We'd raised it a couple of times while I was mayor, and they made, I think it's now $25 a person. I think that's a self-regulating way to get people to come to the Bay now to really see the resources, not just to lather up and lie in the sun, but to actually appreciate the environment and the history of that place. You also have people going to Diamond Head to hike. They need to pay for parking, and there's a fee for entry. And I think there should be more of those types of fees imposed at various resources where access is somewhat controlled, right? It's harder to do it where you can just show up and walk in. But where it can be controlled, I think it should be. For example, I even think the Cocoa Head Stairs. Local folks, no charge. People from who are visiting, they pay a fee, and that fee goes directly to maintaining the stairs, which are in really degraded shape. And while we have the Coconut Coalition, it's working hard to do the full upgrade. It's millions and millions of dollars, and I think that revenue could be obtained by charging. Now there's an easier control access point there, so I'd be looking for ways to do that around the state at various points. The other thing is, I think maybe charging some kind of environmental fee or green fee, whether it's charged upon arrival to visitors, that would go directly to protecting the environment, protecting, for example, the habitat of the monk seal. You saw the picture yesterday. It was in the second section of the starters, or maybe the first page, of the woman who touched the monk seal. But using some of this money to help educate people and to help protect fragile habitats.
It sounds like you certainly have an opinion on a lot of these matters and how things should be run. We have to ask about your next chapter and your political ambitions moving forward. We already know, of course, the Lieutenant Governor, Josh Green, will be running for, of course, that seat of the governor. Wanted to get your thoughts on if you want to make any announcements this morning, or any of your thoughts on your political future.
Yeah. I guess I'd answer it this way. From a young kid in the 60s, lying in the living room of our house in Hilo and watching Walter Cronkite, you guys are too young to know who he is, or I've actually seen him broadcast, but, he covered the civil rights movement, and I was deeply affected by what I saw as a younger, teenager. And then going off to college in the East Coast, getting involved in the McGovern campaign. And I had the real great opportunity to work for Dan Inouye, which has, left me with this memory and impression of public service ever since, clerking for the Chief Justice of our Supreme Court, William S. Richardson, and working on some of his landmark cases on access to beaches and the mountains, serving on neighborhood boards, all about community service. I've always found a passion for our community, both local and a broader way. And while I spent almost 30 years in the private sector, I did for 14 years serve either in the House as a majority leader and then, of course, as mayor. And I liked elective office. And it's in my blood. And I'm not ready to retire. I want to run for higher office. As you know, I've had some fundraisers. running for governor. And I'm working very hard, reaching out to the community, to the people of Hawaii, to get their support in a race for governor. It's just begun. And, since the end of my term as mayor, as I mentioned, I've been on the neighbor islands, talking story with people, listening to them. It's basically listening more than talking, feeling their concerns and their joy, and incorporating it into what I want to do in terms of making our state a better place for everybody.
We're almost out of time, but I would like to know, given all the stress that you experienced as mayor, and you looked certainly more relaxed and rested than the last time we saw you. You talked just a moment ago about that drive and that commitment to public service, but given all the stresses that are part of that job, especially if you were to take the helm as governor, what is that? What is that drive? What do you want for the state of Hawaii? Why would you want to seek that office, knowing all the challenges that you would be facing?
No, I think it's building on the legacy of governors like Governor Burns, Governor Waihee, Governor Cayetano, Governor Ariyoshi for sure, and our current governor. It's how do we continue to make sure that this place is a place with aloha, with continued caring for each other, even though we're changing dramatically, in terms of people who are moving here and who is leaving. So preserving that aloha, but also then embracing certain change that we need to in order to keep us the same. And I do think during my time as mayor, I've dealt with highly controversial issues, and of course the pandemic. I think of the guys who are looking to run. I'm the only one who's actually been in there, having to make these very difficult decisions and to stand alone with both the outcome and the results. I'm not afraid to make those decisions. I think I've learned a lot in my 8 years in terms of how to become a stronger leader and be ready for the difficult problems that are going to occur in the future. And I'm ready for that challenge. I'm not tired. I'm not ready to retire. I do have that passion, and seeing the result of our hard work is something that I think pushes me forward.
Well, we want to thank you for being on this program today. We know that you are someone, again, that is looking forward to making an official announcement down the line, but we thank you for giving us a sneak peek into your thought process as you go through this time right now to not only reflect on your time as mayor, but also look forward to a potential future in a higher office, as you said. But thank you so much for being a part of our program this morning.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Yunji. I did appreciate the time. It went too fast, and I hope maybe we can do it again sometime in the future. And otherwise, I'll see you around the community.
You are always welcome. Thank you so much. Former Mayor Kirk Caldwell, thank you for being here this morning. Aloha. Thanks. Well, Ryan, as you said, a preview, if nothing else. There's no secret that he says he's not ready to retire. He has a lot of fire in the belly, a lot of passion for this community. He's doing these talk story sessions around the state as he goes and speaks with people and hears their concerns outside of just the city and county of Honolulu, which of course was his purview as mayor for 8 years. But really going to the neighbor islands, connecting with family, but also connecting with individuals at, as he said, cafes and at the garden center to find out what their concerns are. And it does sound like he, in that position, if he were to get it, would really advocate for some more managed tourism.
Yeah, and interesting to hear his thought process right now, being out of office and being able to reflect back during that time where he was at the helm during this pandemic and some of the things that he had said maybe he would have done differently. One of the highlights that he mentioned there was maybe push a little harder. We do know that at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a sort of a convoluted relationship between the administration with the governor and lieutenant governor, as well as the city and county, with the city and county asking for resources and asking to provide support, but getting ultimately shut down by the Department of Health on a number of occasions. And so you heard him say he would have probably advocated a lot harder for some of those things that they felt at the time would have been the best path forward, and really making sure that they carried out the vision that he initially had wanted to do, but was denied from the state level. So interesting to hear his thought process now looking back on that time.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned that because we're so sort of dealing with this day to day. It's easy to forget that the city and county basically stood up their own testing program, that they had brought in a bunch of resources. They were really pushing hard for that contact tracing, and the mayor did really encounter a lot of hurdles from the state level. So he's saying there that he wishes, in some ways, that he had pushed a little harder and stuck to his guns. And we've been talking over the last few weeks about this divide, this growing sort of daylight, if you will, that we're seeing between the lieutenant governor and the governor when it comes to masking and reaching that 70% benchmark to lift more COVID-19 restrictions. You hear there the former mayor really siding with the governor on this and taking a more conservative approach.
Yeah, and again, he saying that the health and safety of the community is what's important right now, and that we should not be moving the goalposts, and that ultimately trying to accomplish that 70% vaccination rate and benchmark is something that we should continue to be focusing on, especially with the insurgence and the introduction of the Delta variant in the community.
That's right. And we have so much more to talk about, on the sort of idea of restaurants and businesses. On Monday, Tina Yamaki and Greg Maples, they represent the retailers and the restaurant associations in Hawaii. They're going to be joining us to talk about sort of this push-pull that's happening in restaurants and in retail. We hear about labor shortages. At the same time, we have a relatively high unemployment rate. So what is the disconnect there? We'll be talking with them about that, and also just the health and safety of workers who are going back. In many cases, some who haven't been doing in-person work for a number of months, they're going back, and what are those experiences like? And then on Wednesday, we'll be talking to the head of the Department of Labor and Industrial Relations, Ann Pereira Eustaquio, about what the benefits are. And of course, those are running out in September. So what's the forecast for the state there? So still lots to talk about, but really great to hear from the former mayor about his experiences, and we're looking forward to the book.
Yeah, and I know many people may be asking, well, why are we talking to the former mayor, not the current mayor? We continue to put the requests out for the current mayor, Mayor Blangiardi. Unfortunately, his schedule has not allowed him to be on this program, but we will continue. We see the comments. We will continue to reach out to the current mayor, and hopefully he'll join us back here on this conversation and this platform to answer some of the questions that we have about the city's path moving forward. We thank you all for being a part of this conversation here this morning, and we look forward to seeing you right back here on Friday. Aloha.
Yeah, so until then, have a great week. Aloha.